So we're going to start with a little video introduction, just in case you were interested in something else and you just happen to walk in here and you have no idea what this panel is all about. And I really hope this works. Let's try this. Oops, that was me. I messed that up. Try this again. Okay.
As digital product creators focus on user engagement and key performance indicators, the effect of thoughtless user interfaces on social norms is becoming increasingly more dire. Our carelessly architected digital landscape aims to trigger and please the most primitive animalistic functions of our brain, the so-called lizard brain, and reduces complex human interactions and moral dilemmas to the swipe of a thumb. In this brave new world, even a seemingly simple design choice can have the power to transform social norms and affect the direction of human history and evolution. Join us to learn about the common product design traps that lead to dark patterns impacting our social growth. You'll walk out with the power to advocate for better humanity-first product standards and inspire your team to get on board.
Awesome. So happy that worked. So, today we'll be talking about design ethics. We'll be talking about lizard brains, dark patterns, and how we can make the world a better place through thoughtful choice architecture. Before we get started, a little bit about this wonderful international panel. My name is Elayne. I'm a senior user experience designer at EXO Group. I'm originally from Ukraine, hence the accent. I hope you guys can understand me. I started out my career a while ago before UX or user experience was really a job title. So I had job titles like webmaster, if anybody remembers that, and special projects coordinator. Since then, I worked for big brands like Urban Outfitters, for advertising agencies, for entertainment startups, and even for the Winter Olympics in Sochi. And that's all I'm allowed to say about that league. Our next panelist, Lauren over there in the end, is originally from Sydney, Australia. She is the UX lead for several Google products. Before she worked in tech, Lauren started out in advertising and consulting. Next to her, Jen, representing Austin, Texas, is a product lead at the Knot. And she's at the Knot where she's helping couples pull off their perfect wedding. Prior to working in product, she's had roles in account management and user research. And she goes to great lengths to build user empathy, from singing karaoke with IT pros, true story, to cheering brides on in the set of Say Yes to the Dress. And finally, Diana to my left, hailing from Mexico City, is neither a designer, a PM, or a developer. As a strategy director at RGA, she makes sure that everyone is creating work rooted in real human insight and will have an impact on culture. She currently works on the anti-bias PSA Love Has No Labels for App Council, Samsung, and Verizon. So before we get started, let's get to know you guys a little bit. Is anyone here a designer? Amazing, so many of you, yes. Anyone a product person? Awesome, good show. Anyone in strategy? Brilliant. And then finally, anyone who's a developer or in tech? Awesome. Oh my God, it's even. Amazing. And then finally, that trick question. Who knows what a dark pattern is? Okay, some of you. So we'll get started with the definition. A dark pattern is traditionally been defined as any sort of a user interface in our technology that's been crafted to trick users into doing things they didn't intend to do. Unintentionally is the key word here. So some examples of this might be if you are buying a trip somewhere and you buy the tickets and then somehow you don't know how, but you ended up with insurance for the trip. You're like, I don't remember even clicking that, but somehow I paid like $7 for this insurance. Anytime you think you're making like a one-time purchase and it turns out it's recurring monthly payments. So that's a classic example of dark patterns in user experience. But as we are getting a little bit more clever as consumers and we're getting more smart about the way we use our devices and we've noticed little checkboxes and things like this, companies are getting really clever too. So you will see dark patterns in really unexpected, clever ways. Like this is one example that I found a few months ago as I was looking at Do you guys see the hair on the phone? What do you do when there's hair? You swipe right? If you swipe right on Instagram, you're gonna open the ad.
No.
So this is one way that companies will trick you into doing something you did not expect to do. Amazing, right? And I'm sure I could just see the meeting when this happened. They were like, oh, we're so proud. This was amazing. So let's talk about what actually causes these dark patterns to happen and how they're created. Lauren, as a designer, let's start with you. Are designers like us to blame for this?
I don't know about blame, but I think that we're all responsible on a team for the decisions we make and the products we put out into the world. And for me, I think situations like this usually happen when we focus on short-term thinking, short-term business strategy thinking, rather than long-term thinking. And so, like Elayne said, you'll be in a meeting and someone's like, oh, we need to drive up the numbers, we need to spike in the chart, we need to make a difference somehow this week, we'll worry about next week later. And so someone will have an idea like this, and we'll think about implementing it. And that's usually when I will put up my hand and say, how do we think that's going to make people feel? We know that that will work in the short term, but in the long term, it's actually going to make them hate us, and they probably won't come back. So we'll achieve something today, but then it'll make it twice as hard to achieve something tomorrow. And that's, one of the main causes I've seen of things like this.
As the product representative on the panel, I would also say, similarly, product metrics. You want to have product metrics that motivate your teams, but also that match your user goals. So, for example, when I was karaokeing with these IT professionals, earlier in my career, I actually worked at a software startup where one of our key metrics was time spent on site. And that's not inherently an evil metric. But what we found was that it actually created bad user experiences and not optimal paths for our users. So things like we would hide content behind clicks, we had a confusing navigation, and the problems with these things were not only were we just creating these bad users experiences and not realizing it, but also we thought we were doing great. We saw we had great time on site. Maybe it was even increasing. And so because that wasn't actually matching the use cases that we were trying to solve for, then we didn't even know what we were doing for our users.
I think the only thing I would add is one of the biggest issues I see that keeps causing dark patterns is simply lack of time. Sometimes when you get one day to design a product or to do something, you tend to take the easy way out, the lazy way out, and dark patterns aren't really very elegant. So people just tend to choose what's easiest and what's quickest to solve a problem.
Definitely. I want to talk for a second about why dark patterns are so effective, and that's actually where our lizard brains come in. So the way that this works is there are all these cognitive biases that are basically the result of this prehistoric lizard brain that we have within all of us. And the only job that the lizard brain has is to get us to survive. And in order to do that, we have to make a decision super quickly. We have to just really instantaneously make the right choice. It doesn't have to be the best choice, it just has to be good enough so we don't get eaten by a dinosaur. And it's, I'll give you guys a little definition here about cognitive biases. It's basically the science of how and why people don't always make the best decision for themselves. And you could say it's an irrational decision. And one example of a bias I like to use is familiarity bias. So if I'm a lizard in prehistoric dinosaur times, and I come upon two bushes, and they both have berries on them, and I have to just really quickly make a choice, do I eat the berries I've eaten before, or do I try these new berries that also look kind of good, but I just have to decide right now, or a dinosaur is going to come and eat me. I'm just going to go for the berries I've eaten before because that, ensures my survival. I know it's pretty safe, and I can move on and go and hide somewhere. But now, of course, as a human being, these biases still live within me, and so as a product designer, somebody might show me something that's familiar to me, and I'm more likely to go towards that choice because my lizard brain is telling me it's safe, it's familiar, it's fine, eat this, dinosaur's not going to catch you. So there's 188 of these different biases, and as product creators, we're getting really clever in how to use this to our advantage. And let's start with Diana, someone working in advertising. How have you seen this play out for better or worse in your experience?
You know, having a solid understanding of cognitive bias has been kind of marketers' best kept secret for decades. Humans are not rational creatures. We smoke, we drink, we procrastinate, we tend to choose the shiny object. And that's really been what's carrying forth advertising for a long time. When you think about it, we choose insurance because a talking lizard tells us to, not because we talk about all these amazing ways that it's going to protect us. So I'm actually really excited about understanding cognitive bias as we enter this really crazy new world of, voice-enabled technology. We're creating new behaviors every day online. So I think what's really exciting is as we create all these new behaviors online, unlike before when we were just relying on psychology and understanding of human behavior, now we actually have all this data to prove this out. So we have all this data to understand humans' crazy, irrational patterns. And I personally think that this has some great implications when we start thinking about the fields of education, of health, of substance abuse, even thinking about disabilities. There is really a great opportunity to solve these age-old problems in disruptive, innovative ways. Of course, the dark side of it, which is what kind of sucks, is that we are, for the most part, using this understanding of cognitive biases to get people into this 3-hour internet K-hole and just keep, and not the best things for ourselves, but I'm excited about the future nonetheless.
Yeah, even to dig into that further, the way that biases play out in social networks or two-sided marketplaces actually inherently capitalize on the things that make those things successful. So like if you think about reciprocity bias, right? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That plays out in social networks in so many ways. You send me a friend request, you ask for an endorsement, you post something and you hope that someone will respond to it in some way. And people doing that creates a network effect, which also helps these types of platforms be more successful. The more people that are on a network doing more things exponentially makes the network even better. So the combination between these biases, these marketplace dynamics, is just this constant feedback loop that we just have to question, like, what's the user value, right? It's not that these things are so inherently bad, but are there some of them that are way better for the users than others?
I thought I would talk us through a tool that I've seen a lot of product designers starting to use in the last few years that was typically used a lot sort of 20 years ago in fast food pricing, but now seems to have crept into digital product design as well. And it plays on a few different cognitive biases that we have. And that's the decoy effect. Does anyone know what a decoy effect is? I'm sure some of you do. I'll walk us through it. So the decoy effect is when, as a product team or a product designer, you have two options that you want to present to a user, and you know that you want them to choose one of those two options. And so you introduce a third option that makes the less appealing option suddenly look a lot more appealing. And this is an example I found recently from I think it's a clothing rental company. And basically what's happening here is, and I can kind of imagine how this went down in the meeting. Someone probably said, okay, we ran the numbers, we're going to have these two plans. There's going to be plan A, it's going to be $59, and plan B, and it's going to be $79. And then someone else said, well, we probably want everyone to choose the $79 plan, right? Because then we'll make more money. And people were like, yeah, that's definitely what we want them to do. But we know that people are less likely to choose that one because it's more expensive, and they're still trying out the product, and they're not sure yet if it's right for them. So why don't we introduce a third option? And what they've done here is the basic option and the premium option both have 3 things in the list of features of what you get for that package. And then the one in the middle only has 2, so it suddenly looks inferior to both of them. And then if you compare the middle option to the premium option, you see that you actually get a lot more for your money than you do in the second option. And so that middle option is really just a decoy. It was placed there to make you choose the most expensive option. And then they've, really gone the whole hog and put it in red and selected it by default and literally written best value on top of it so that you can't be at all confused about which of those three options is the best value for you. And so this is really just another example I've seen a lot of, product designers using cognitive biases to try and influence people and get them to choose a certain thing.
So why are experiences like this so terrible for humanity as a whole? Like, one could say that actually the reason they're so successful is just because they're responding to what people want and what we're programmed to do, and it's just how humanity functions. Dan, do you want to start?
Yeah, firstly, I don't know if what people want is necessarily what people need at all times. I think a good example is, Uber personalization is a trend that by all intents and purposes is kind of awesome. For example, you can't see, but I'm wearing really cool white pants, and it took me a while to find them on the internet. So obviously for the longest time, I kept getting all these advertisings for white pants, which is exactly what I want. I'm like, cool, something super useful. Thanks for personalizing everything to my needs, advertising. But then you can think about it in a flip side. Like, let's think about social networks for a second, and let's think about society. We are currently living in one of the most divisive times in America. Research has shown that one of the best ways to combat, bias and division and whatnot is simply by exposure, by being exposed to someone that's different from you and by being exposed to different opinions. The way America is set up, it's very, very hard. It's an inherently segregated place. It's very large, so it's really very hard to actually find other people. But social media can actually be a really effective way to get exposure to different points of views and different opinions. Enter Uber personalization. Because of Uber personalization, what we're getting is things we like, things we agree with, and we're kind of getting into this echo chamber effect where we are only talking to people like ourselves and only being exposed to people like ourselves. So I think this is an example of someone, a company that started with good intentions, which is, let's connect to each other. But, as companies, we kind of have a responsibility to iterate, to take a step back and look at the impact that we're causing on society and be like, how can we go back to our original goals? The landscape has inherently changed in the past 10 years or so what are we doing to help this move forward?
Speaking of the impact on society, the other day I was reading an article. On average, we touch our phones 2,617 times. That is ridiculous, right? Like, we need to get a life. But I think it's also causing larger problems. People's ability to concentrate, anxiety levels are at an all-time high, maintaining normal relationships. And there's even studies that are showing different physical things around. We're all like hunched over all the time on our phones. People are sleeping not as well because you're in the dark with a bright screen in your face. And so, there's definitely a lot of levels of how this is affecting society. On the other hand, we all are responsible for the ways we spend our own time. We can't blame technology on everything, right? So for me, I've tried to put together a few life hacks that help me kind of unplug a bit. One of them is turning my phone to grayscale. Let me tell you, looking at Instagram in black and white is just not that fun. You don't want to do it anymore. Or turning off a lot of your notifications. Getting a LinkedIn request from my coworker sitting next to me, I don't need to know that. It's fine. I'll see it later. And lastly, I would say, I've really been trying to engage in more long-form content. And, I have a Kindle and I have my phone with me all the time, and so just turning my phone on airplane mode at least lets me concentrate and doesn't, get me, going into my email and seeing what's going on there. So these are just some ways that I've found that I can kind of take back my own time.
It's crazy though, because phone is one thing, but even now there's all these voice technologies, and my God, my 6-year-old nephew is turning into an asshole because he's talking to Alexa. You know how you talk to Alexa Alexa, turn on the lights. And he's like, Deanna, bring me this. I'm like, hey, please. Like, your children are. I think we're soon going to be having this conversation of like, what is the responsibility of like even voice activated assistants? Because they are, like it or not, they are actually swaying how people grow up as well. And some of these people might not be able to, have life hacks at this point.
No, seriously, I mean, that's a great point. When you think about new platforms, like we as technologists actually have the ability to pause, have the foresight to say like, how might we actually put choice architecture in place for these new emerging platforms that are already in society now. And I even think like, we as technologists are like, oh, we can solve everything or we can ruin everything. But perhaps we actually need to bring other stakeholders into these conversations, economists, sociologists, psychologists. Perhaps we actually need to have like a larger lens to think about the long-term impact of some of these new emerging technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think about all the time is, you guys probably remember this, back in 2016, Netflix got like busted on an investor call saying things like, oh, our biggest competitors are HBO and Sleep. Do you remember this? There was such a huge public backlash, and everyone's like, Sleep? What do you mean? Netflix, how dare you compete with Sleep? That's like a natural human right. And then as I was doing research for this panel, I saw this. This is a quote from a few months ago. So after 2016, they like doubled down. The Netflix CEO, we love Netflix, said our biggest competitor is Sleep, HBO is Network, and we're winning. So he's so like embracing this, and it's amazing to me because, okay, sure, great, I'm glad we're doing so well. Netflix is giving us all the world's entertainment at our fingertips, isn't that lovely? But at the end of the day, as designers, if we hear something like this being said in the company we work for, or in like our competitor's company, in our landscape, don't we have a responsibility to step in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely do have a responsibility to step in. It's the endless challenge, how do we find the balance between what's right for society, what's right for, our own moral compass, and also how do we meet like companies' KPIs and how do we do what's right? And I keep going back to this point, but really the biggest responsibility and the biggest way we can do it is by acknowledging that it's a hard path, and sometimes choosing the hard path is really, it's kind of like the unpaved road because we haven't figured it out. We have figured out how to make things shittier sometimes, but we haven't figured out like what are all the myriad of ways that we can start solving this.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this all the time. Every single meeting I walk into, I look around the room and I just think about the fact that I'm probably the only person in the room who's there to advocate for not the business, who's there to advocate for the end user, for the people who are going to have to use this thing. And so I just try to keep that front and center of my mind when I'm in any situation where we're coming up with, ideas for how we can move a project or a product forward. I'm the user advocate. I'm the person who's, sitting here for them, advocating for them because they don't have a seat at this table. And that's really my way of sort of handling it.
As a product person, I just have to say, if your product person is not also an advocate for the user, it's a bigger problem. But actually at the Knot, so if you don't know what the Knot is, we help couples plan their weddings. A new mantra that we've kind of had is give back time and attention. And so yes, we want to be the key place that you're planning your wedding, helping you make all your big decisions, but how might we also understand that you have a life and that you actually don't want planning to take over every aspect of your life. And if we can actually help you do those jobs, then you can spend more time doing the things that are actually important to you, that are a bigger part of your life.
Absolutely. As a designer myself, something that inspires me to do better always is, I don't know if you guys read this book by Chris Evans. He wrote The Mighty Micro. And what he did is he basically analyzed like all of the information that we as humans are exposed to on a daily basis. And he concluded that there's just too much. The information today is so overwhelming that no human can handle it unaided. Do you know when this book was written? Guess. It was in 1979. So can you just imagine how much information we're exposed to on a daily basis right now, and how difficult it is for our brains to process all this? And of course, technology plays a really big part of it, because that's where the majority of our information actually comes from. So one of the things that we want to talk about in this panel is choice architecture. It's one of the most powerful tools that we have in our box as product creators. And when I say product creators, I mean all of you in this room. It's designers, it's product people, it's strategists, it's developers. In a sense, we're all designers because we're designing that final experience in one way or another. And choice architecture is a term that was coined by Richard Thaler, who actually won the Nobel Prize just last year. He coined the term in 2008, and it's basically the idea that the way that choices are presented to people will impact decision making. So the really simple example is if you're at the grocery store and the donuts are right there in the checkout line and they're just so easy to get to, and like the fruit and the healthy snacks are up all these like chutes and ladders in the back and you have to really go hard to find them, you're probably just going to get the donuts, and vice versa. So let's start with you, Jen. What's a good example of good choice architecture?
So again, I'll talk about my current company in a positive light. No, I'm just joking. But at the Knot, we actually kind of have this new mantra called leave no dead ends. So the Knot's been around for almost 20 years. We are experts at planning weddings. Most couples have never planned a big event before, let alone a wedding, so they actually need an expert in the room and they want to be guided. On the other hand, people have different needs and we want to make sure that we meet users where they are. And so we don't want to leave any dead ends. One of the biggest milestones in wedding planning is finding your venue. And we have a lot of great advertisers on our site that can help you with this. We have a venue marketplace. But we also want to make sure that if you can't afford a venue, that we let you know there's local parks in the area. You can get married at City Hall. What about a parent or a friend's house? And so in our new experiences, as we think about leaving no dead ends, we want to make sure that we provide you with the options that we have, but we also let you know other things that you can do if you're on a lower budget.
Cool. I'll start with a totally different example. Has anybody heard of this insurance company called Lemonade? Cool, a couple of you. So Lemonade is a really cool insurance startup company. What they're essentially doing is they're using a thorough understanding of cognitive bias. They actually have a chief behavioral scientist on staff, Dan Ariely, awesome dude. But they're using that as well as a super elegant choice architecture to not only sell more insurance, but actually design a way better product. Typically when you have insurance, it takes about 3 to 5 days to get your claims back. Lemonade can do this in 3 seconds. Of course they do it with like 18 crazy anti-fraud algorithms, but one of the things that they also do is make sure that you're not going to commit insurance fraud by making you accountable at every step of the way. Insurance fraud is one of the most rampant, easy crimes in the world. One of the reasons why I suspect is because if anybody's ever filed an insurance claim, you will see that it's very easy to lie. It's a very faceless, first it's a terrible experience. It's like a bunch of pages with 8-point font. You don't understand what they're talking about. And then at the end you sign and you're like, yeah, sure, of course I lost my jacket, whatever. So it's a part of the reason why it's so rampant is maybe because of that. The way Lemonade redesigned it is, firstly it's all on your phone. But the very first thing you do in this experience is sign. So by starting with a signature, you're immediately making yourself more accountable. The second thing you do is, rather than fill out this complicated faceless form, you send a video of yourself. It's a behavior that we know, but you literally just hold your camera and say, hey, my house got robbed and this happened, blah, blah, blah. So already, more accountability, face to face, you're less likely to lie. And then the third thing that they do is when you finally, before submitting your form, they ask you, so, any of the leftover money, we're going to donate to a charity of your choice. Choose a charity. So when you combine all these three things, they can not only provide a better product, but give you a claim in 3 seconds. So choice architecture at work, it's awesome.
Absolutely. So we thought it might be fun to talk through like a real example that might happen at anybody's workplace back in the day. So you can go back to work and say, oh, okay, like I know how to handle something like this. And in order to do this, we have a special guest, Quinn. Hi, Quinn. Quinn is actually the designer who worked on this amazing deck, so thank you, Quinn, for that. She helped us organize this panel. And she's here to pose a scenario to the panel.
Hi, thanks for that plug. I'm Quinn, and I'm a product designer. I am here because I'm being asked to redesign a sign-up screen. And this is a pretty mundane, easy task that lots of designers, I'm sure, are used to executing at work. But the reason for this redesign is the business that I'm working for is starting a partnership with an advertiser that is starting to share our users' information. And what that user share of information will end up doing will be sending them spam emails and sending them junk mail that might show up right at their door. So what used to be a simple account create flow that at the end of it you are met with the super awesome app that we built, at the end of it now you're met with junk mail and spam and sent to your door. So this is of course unless they read the terms and conditions that are extremely fine print as usual that we know they're not actually going to read. So at this point I'm at a crossroads. I can just do this and get on and go get a coffee, or push back maybe. I don't feel like this is right. What should I do?
Lauren is a designer. Let's start with you.
Thanks for the question, Quinn. So just to paraphrase, I think it was a product designer being asked to do something that they don't think is necessarily ethical or might result in a dark pattern. So I'll answer in two sort of parts because I think there's two ways of handling this. The first one is a little bit more strategic and the second one is a bit more tactical. So on the strategic side, what I tend to do in situations like that is insert myself into business strategy far earlier in the process than that moment where you're being asked to execute on something. And so that requires a bit of foresight and planning. But one of the easiest ways I've found to do that is when you know there's a business strategy meeting happening, just show up. And no one will tell you to leave because they won't realize you weren't on the invite. I've tried it a million times and it's fine. I did it when I was in advertising, when I was in consulting, and now I do it in tech, and literally no one's ever said, were you on the invite? I just sit down like I own the place and everyone's cool. And then once you're in the meeting, keep quiet, and then occasionally, maybe offer something that's a suggestion that looks like business strategy, but is actually going to result in a better end user experience. But don't couch it as, it would be better for the users as, because you're in a business strategy meeting, right? So make it about business strategy. So that's what I would do strategically, and that takes some planning, right? So like you can start working on that. And then on the tactical side, because we've all been asked to do things that we don't think are going to be good for end users or that we think are necessarily ethical. What I do in that situation is I take a step back and try to think about what it is that's motivating the person who's asking me to do that thing. And so, I don't necessarily do it right there and then in the meeting where I'm being asked to like design the checkbox or whatever it is. I'll be like, yeah, cool, okay, let's talk about this afterwards. And then I'll go back to my desk and be like, okay, so product manager X just asked me to do Y. What does product manager X actually want? They probably don't want me to build the checkbox feature. They probably want to get promoted or drive up, some numbers, or they want to hit a sales target or whatever it is. Is there a way I can help them to achieve that goal without doing the thing they just asked me to do? And sometimes I'll even brainstorm with them. I'll get in a room, I'll be like, okay, so it looks like you're trying to do X. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's think about some other ways we could do that. Maybe we could just take this existing feature we already have and make it better. Or maybe we could put together a presentation for your boss so you look really smart. Or maybe we could, design a new feature that's not the one you're asking for, but might actually still achieve that goal, but not be so bad for users. And so it's really about understanding what motivates people and then helping them to achieve that kind of goal while also finding a compromise.
So Jen, as somebody representing product in the business, usually designers work with product a lot, I know I do. How do we convince a product person who's also concerned about revenue-based KPIs?
Yeah, Lauren brought up a lot of great points that I think are definitely things that I would consider. Also, the long-term value of a customer, right? Like, We want to be aligned that whatever we do could break our users' trust. And if we all agree with that, you can actually put quantification behind that. So we would never want to do something that would cause us to lose our users, that would cause it to hurt our brand. There's a lot of ways that you can talk about the actual impact that would happen. On the other side, I would say, like, put on your advertiser hat. If we just spam all our users, then that's not good for our advertisers either. We are probably not meeting the goals that they were hoping for when they partnered with us. And so how might we actually say, like, how can we meet both goals together? We want our advertisers to be happy and come back. We want our customers to be happy and come back. And so potentially there's some ways, can we target a smaller audience that would actually be interested in this offer instead of everyone? Or potentially like us as the company, could we say, hey, we know our users better than you do. This is what would work to target these users versus what you think that you know about our audience.
So Diana, as someone who works with clients mostly in advertising, what do we do when it's our client who wants something and we know it's wrong for us and it's wrong for them?
Well, it's funny. I'm actually dealing with this at the moment. I'll start with just saying that I think clients always usually want the best for their company. Like, they want their company to succeed. They want their company to not be a spammy, terrible company, and they really do want a long-term, like, successful vision. What happens oftentimes is, like, what's happening right now is we get a very tactical brief. As a strategist, this is a red flag for me, because a tactical brief that tells us do this, that's not a brief for strategy. Our job as strategists is to, get a problem and then come up with a solution. We are the ones that provide the tactics. So what we did in this case is, step one, go back to the client, understand what was the underlying reason behind this brief. Is there a shiny new tool on Twitter or Facebook or somewhere that we want to use? Is there, a bigger KPI that you want to drive towards? Or is this ask coming from somewhere else and you need to solve it? So that was the first thing we did. And funnily enough, we realized that the client was actually just trying to do us a favor and kind of like solve the brief herself and just give us a solution. So we're like, that's great. Let us have a think and get back to you. Setting a good timeline is super, super important. I really strongly believe that, the more time we can get on things, the better we can do our jobs, because we have time to think, to iterate, to try all the possible solutions, and to come up with something that works better. So we didn't tell her we're not going to solve your brief. What we instead did is I went back to my team, created a new kind of brief that really talked about the more higher level problem, and then we set about solving it and providing alternate solutions. I think the worst thing one can do is to come back to a client and be like, this is such a bad idea, because what are you providing, You're just providing criticism, but no solution. So we do have to come back to the solution and do the hard work, and it's working right now. It's working. So we found a common ground, and we are pushing forward on a better solution.
Yeah, just on that, I think what you said there is really key about coming back with no solution and saying something's a bad idea is never a good idea. And it doesn't just happen in, sort of an agency side, it also happens when you're in-house. And so, same situation with your question, Gwen, like, if a product person comes to a designer and says, can you do X? And you think in your head, oh my God, that's a really bad idea. And that's going to result in a really terrible outcome. Sometimes telling them that isn't the best way to go about it. Maybe you just go away and come up with some evidence as to why that's not a great idea, and then also support that with a solution for an alternative. And that's what I do a lot, even at Google right now. I'll often just partner with my research partner on my team and just say, like, how can we really extrapolate and really quickly come up with some numbers to show that this thing that they're asking us to do isn't a good idea, and then propose something that we know is a better idea. I did it just this week, and it worked.
So what can we do as people who care about design ethics and the right way to solve problems for our users before even a situation like this comes up, so that we can just set ourselves and our teams up for success?
Something that we've done at companies I've worked at is get users in front of your entire company. So right now we have monthly user panels where we bring in different segments of users and everyone in the organization is invited. So not only does it get us all on the same playing field of hearing from our users directly, we can actually align on what the bigger problems are, the language that people are using. Then you see amazing things like one of your executives quote a user, and you're like, yeah, I've been trying to tell you that, but now you know. And even in smaller groups, if you can't get your entire organization, you know, your design partner, your tech partner, other stakeholders, marketing, ops, getting them in a room so they can see user interviews and see people using your experiences. I've found that developers fix bugs or bad user experiences very quickly when they see a user struggling so much. So that's worked for me.
One of the things I think is super, super important is to make sure you have a diverse team. Diversity is important not just because it's 2018, but because diversity ensures that we have enough people to spot problems that we wouldn't normally see, and to ensure that we're also building tools that are inclusive and for everyone. So I find it ridiculous that there's like 56 million Latin people in the US, and Alexa still can't understand my father, for example. So I think it's super important. Sometimes it's very hard for us to have diverse teams. Sometimes we're a startup and the team is just ourselves, or maybe ourselves and our best friend. In those situations, I highly, highly recommend that everybody get the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. A lot of people at RGA use it, and it's just a super great series of workshops and stress tests that make sure that your products kind of like are really touching upon all kinds of people and that they can serve more people. And it's actually a way to make your products even stronger.
Yeah, one of the strategies I've used over the last probably 5 years is to reward good behavior when I see it. And so we have a peer bonus program at Google where you can give someone a small cash bonus for doing something awesome. And I will do it all the time, especially for people who are not in the UX team, and reward them for helping the UX team or doing something that results in a good user experience. And when I, give them that bonus, I will also copy in like the whole cross-functional team. So all of the other engineers and product people and legal people and everyone, because I want to make a good example of what they've done, and I want them to feel recognized. And I've usually found that when people, especially engineers, see another engineer being rewarded for that kind of behavior, they tend to start to model it and follow that behavior. So
she's using behavioral science on her own team, which is the way to go.
One other thing I want to bring up is the jobs to be done framework. Are people familiar with that? So yeah, it's basically, instead of looking at user segments, you're actually focusing on like what is the job the user is trying to be done, really like highlighting the specific human need. And I think that's also a great way to orient your teams on what you're working on and to really think about the user front and center. If you want to learn more about it, Clay Christensen has this great book, Competing Against Luck, that I really recommend.
So unless you guys have anything else to add, I'm going to summarize the key takeaways that you can all take back to your jobs, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience in case you want to ask us anything. Get ready. So how do we avoid dark patterns, and how do we promote design ethics back on the products that we're working on? The first thing is to always examine choice architecture. What choices are you giving the users? Are you highlighting the one that's best for them or the one that's best for the company? How are these choices presented? Always know your audience. Obviously, it's 2018, we all have to speak to our users, but also know their intentions. Really try to understand what does the user want, like in life in general. And then what does the user want from me as the person building this product or service? What have I told the user they can expect from me? And then what do I owe them to get informed consent for whatever path I'm about to send them on? Solve the right user problem. That's the jobs to be done framework. Understand what they're trying to do and help them get there. Make user research a full team process. Involve the developers. This is 100% true. I do this with my team all the time. I had to lie to my developers and be like, hey, I'm inviting you to this really important development meeting, and I'd be like, sorry, it's user testing. And then after this, they come out and they're like, oh, okay, the user said this, I'm gonna fix it, I'm gonna fix this good. Like, oh, okay, great, I'm glad you showed up. And absolutely to Diana's point, you have to build a diverse team and reward good behavior. If you celebrate anytime a developer or someone whose primary job is not actually to focus on the user needs does a good work, everybody else wants to do it. Finally, work with partners on problem alignment, not on solutions. If somebody comes to you with a solution, take a step back. Figure out what are you actually trying to accomplish. What are your goals? What are you trying to do? And then let's come up with a solution together. All of us together will probably reach a better outcome than you just sitting in your corner and be like, okay, we just probably need to get this done. Let's do it. So to this end, I guess that's about all from us, but we would love to take some of your questions and help you guys out. There's a microphone right in the middle if you want to step up and ask us something. Just tell us your name and what your question is.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a UX designer from Oakland, and my question is about numbers and metrics and data analysis. And one of the things that I always find really interesting is that there's this kind of circuitous, self-justifying logic about doing these dark patterns. For example, I remember one time when I was working at a hospitality company, they had this really annoying modal that popped up on the front page of the website. And I said, you guys, I think this is really harmful to us. This is a really jarring experience. And they said, no, it's great for us. It converts at 3%. And I stopped and I said, well, have you ever done the work to check out what the other 97% of people who see this mobile are thinking and feeling about your brand? And they said, no, but we care about the numbers of the revenue. The problem is, if you don't have the resources as a designer to track that other 97%, what do you do to back those numbers at 3%?
Get scrappy. No, I mean, that's a real problem. And I've definitely worked in situations before I was in tech and before I was in advertising where we didn't really have research budgets and we didn't have the ability to go out and really dive deep into those things, and everyone else is more worried about getting through this week than, really looking at the other 97%. But that's my one piece of advice to you, is just be as scrappy as you possibly can. There's always a way to do some guerrilla research and figure out what's going on. Even if that's just grabbing 5 people off the street and getting them to walk through the thing and buying them a cup of coffee, or last week, I was sort of telling that story to Quinn. I needed to do some really quick research to figure something out, and I partnered with the researcher on my team, and we ran a Qualtrics survey. So I mocked up 2 alternative scenarios for a flow that we were proposing, and we ran a survey on both of them. And it cost almost nothing because they were all completed by Mechanical Turk user participants. So I think we surveyed 1,000 people for a couple $100. So there's always ways to do things on the cheap and do things quickly. We literally got that together overnight. We thought about it at 2 in the afternoon. I slapped together some mocks, she slapped together a survey, and the next morning we had results. So that's my plan.
Also, that conversion is shit. Anyone that's saying that's great is lying to themselves.
So I'm Amy Hardy. I own a design research company, and we're pulled in by experienced teams or product teams, but mostly experienced teams. And what happens is the experienced person says, I need somebody on my side to validate these decisions because I feel like I don't have a seat at the table. And so what they lack is they lack the voice and the credibility in the organization to actually invoke that change. Because they may be user experience strategist or user experience director, but they report to marketing, and the CMO actually is going to get fired if they don't have the numbers. So for people that feel like they don't have the validity or the credibility in their organization because they don't have the power of their voice to invoke change, do you have any recommendations?
Just keep working harder is the most simple thing. I think it's the hardest thing ever in that way. I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to a lot of people that don't feel like they have the power, which oftentimes it really is set more one-on-ones with people, especially with, the higher ups, because sometimes it's very, very hard for our voice to be heard when we're in a room with like 8 other people. And when you do set those one-on-ones, come prepared. Come prepared with a presentation, come prepared with some numbers, come prepared with some ideas. Getting respect and getting kind of like that voice to do the right thing is not like a matter of just speaking up in meetings. It's a hard, long process, and it really is, unfortunately, like you do have to put in all that extra effort and put in all the extra work. And I think what's most important, especially, the more junior people are, is to make sure we have the right proof points as often as possible. Make sure that, we always come with solutions or with at least like initiative and thoughts.
Yeah, finding an advocate on the executive level is going to be the best way to do that. And like Diana said, that seems like a good tactic. Also, getting users in front of people. The more that people empathize with users, the more that you can actually build empathy and your story with data.
So you're not alone. And I have some little numbers I can give you. There are 3 VPs of design at Google, or of UX, and there are like hundreds of engineering and hundreds of product and 3 of UX. So I know exactly what you mean about not really having an equal seat at the table and not feeling like you have power, because even the most senior UX people don't feel like they have power. But we've really been working on that strategically as a team of thousands of people that we are over the last few years. And one of the things we found that's most effective is by involving everyone else in the company in the actual user experience process, the design process, and the research process. And one of the ways we've started to do that is using design sprints. And so we will literally get everyone in a room for a few days. The lawyers, the PMs, the engineers, everyone. And we will work through what is the problem we're trying to solve and what are some different ways we can solve that. And that's definitely started to create a situation where they start to have a lot more respect for what it is we do and really understand the value of user experience, design, and research, and how focusing on the user can actually really have tangible results. So that's one suggestion I have for you.
We have time for two more questions.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm the PM for iOS and mobile at a fashion tech startup called Run the Runway. And like a lot of companies, we do a ton of A/B testing to get quick learnings about how users are responding to things. But we can't run those tests forever. We run until there's just significant. But that always means that they're going to win on fairly short-term metrics, like conversion, orders, revenue, things like that. We can't predict LTV, we can't predict churn from like a 2-4 week period. So what do you recommend for winning treatments that help give you leading indicators of like long-term trends for users?
We have a very interesting KPI when the work I do with Ad Council and other type of CSR work that might be able to be applied. But what we do is we do monthly surveys on kind of like the societal impact that our work is having, because a lot of the work we do has to have, it has to literally reduce bias or do other things. So and we've been working on trying to apply this kind of testing to other clients, but it's just this idea of you literally have 3 survey questions, like how do you feel about this issue? How do you feel about this issue? And you ask it on a monthly roving basis, and then you end up measuring it on a yearly basis. So it's an interesting technique. It's kind of like, we call them like the soft KPIs, but they've been quite helpful for having a different metric and a different way of level setting instead of just always going for that short win.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. A/B tests clearly have to have metrics that they're pacing toward in a specific test, but retention. So however you can integrate retention into thinking about what you end up prioritizing is so important. Even if do they come back in a week, or do they purchase at X time? So how can you actually incorporate some of those repeat metrics? And then to Diana's point, I would always say putting, when we do a lot of our A/B tests, we actually also sometimes have a survey there or a call room form where we can also get the qualitative feedback as well. And so you can see does the qualitative feedback actually match what you're quantitatively seeing? Or are you getting people that are oh, this is in my face, or getting complaints there, and then you can kind of like paint a different picture if you think that potentially you're getting results that don't seem valid.
There's a really good book you should read. It's called Experiments for Designers. That will answer your question.
We'll take one more question, and then everybody else who wants to talk to us will be available right after the panel, so don't worry, we'll love to talk to you.
Hello, my name is Catherine Brookshire, and I am a user experience researcher. Previously, the government has made a couple of laws, like the Can-Spam Act, which means that businesses are legally required to have an unsubscribe button. There are also financial penalties for sending text messages if someone says stop. So you've been talking about dark patterns and a lot of this grassroots ways to make a change. My question is there room for a larger body of oversight to help eliminate some of these dark patterns?
Do you want to take this? Okay, it's a hard issue. I think one of the interesting things, I'll start from the positive end of choice architecture. Richard Thaler actually, one of his things when he started is how do we start implementing better choice architecture and nudges in public. So he's actually is a big advocate for integrating these kind of things in public policy. And we've seen this succeed in a lot of countries. Singapore is a great case study of a country that the government is actually quite involved in how, not necessarily how technology works, but even like public works and stuff, and having simple nudges for the people to do what is right for them. So I think the first wave, at least that there might be some opportunity for, is not necessarily, I don't know about the dark pattern world of, advocating for not building this, but what I am seeing a lot of advocating is for building positive nudges for people. So whether we want people to diet more or whether we want to implement some education programs, I've seen a lot of choice architecture start to be implemented in how we sign up for a 401k, for example. So I think the conversation is starting in that direction. I definitely see once we have enough data and enough information about the other dark side of it, there's going to be something happening. But currently, I think we're just in the beginning of the nudge conversation.
It's also kind of a question about the philosophy of regulation, right? Like, should there be an overarching body that oversees all of this like digital product landscape and deciding whether something's okay or not okay? Personally, I'm not a huge advocate for that kind of regulation because I think all that happens when you do that is people just push right up to the limit of the regulation and find ways to skirt around it. So what I would rather see happen is that we all start to have a lot more empathy for the people that we're building products for, and that we, like these people in this room, the people who are working in user experience and product design and product management, are really trying to help all the other people who build those products with us to have as much empathy as possible and to understand how important that is. I'd rather do that than be in a situation where we're constantly checking what are the regulations and how much can we push this.
Thank you guys so much for the questions. We want to keep talking to you, and one of the things that I want to share is I organized this panel because I was sitting in the audience last year at South by 2017 like you were, and I went to like every single design panel I wanted to go to. And one of the things I didn't hear was the conversation happening about design ethics, and I would end up talking like in the audience or in the hallways to people about this, and I knew there was a need to have this conversation. So I just got a panel together with some of my friends, the people I've worked with, and I applied, and here we are today. So I really hope that all the next steps in this, it's because you guys are in this panel today and you're inspired to keep talking about something that matters to you. I hope it's design ethics personally, but whatever it is that matters to you, please don't just go back to your computers and work away in silence. Like, there's definitely other people who are interested in the topics you're interested in. I would really love to empower all of us to bring the conversation to a larger scale. If you want to talk to us, we're on Twitter, #ChoiceArchitect. We have a website where you can connect to us. We would love to talk to you outside in the hallway or wherever. And I want to thank this wonderful panel for being here today. I couldn't have done this without you. Couldn't have done it without Quinn, who helped us put together this amazing deck. She's an illustrator from New York, and more of her work, her web comics are on quinnryan.com. Thank you so much for being here. We know you could have gone and got lunch right now, but we're so happy you're here instead. Please talk to us after, and thank you for coming.